The trip was for year 10 and 11 students. We took 43 students altogether, from about half and half from year 10 and year 11. All of them are doing history GCSE. And the course we study is called The Origins and Course of the First World War. It starts 1900 through to 1918.
The trip was really interesting because we saw like all the places that we're like learning about in history.
The trip was really fun. I learned a lot from both teachers and tour guides. The trips were long, but they were very rewarding in the end, as many of the places we went to really opened my eyes on a lot of things.
So we, the first day started incredibly early at 4 a.m. And we were on a crossing from Dover to Calais, and then we went straight to Ypres. So the town is called Ypres in French, but it's actually a Belgian-speaking town. It's spelled Yper, I-E-P-E-R, and that's where we went to first. So our first port of call was the In Flanders Field Museum, which is in the old cloth hall in the middle of Ypres. And one of the amazing things about Ypres is when you go and look at it today, it looks like a medieval town, but actually it's all about 90 years old, because after it was completely decimated during the war, they rebuilt it pretty much exactly as it had been before the First World War. So you're in a building that looks medieval, but it's actually about 90 years old. So that gives a really good basis of understanding the point of Ypres, really, in terms of understanding the war and how it was fought. The second place that we went to was Hooger Crater Museum, which has a trench reconstruction behind the museum, which was brilliant for giving the students a real sense of how the configuration of the trenches was, so the zigzag network, how the barbed wire was used, how the sandbags were used to raise the size of the trench. And then also a really fantastic museum that had so many exhibits, so many artifacts in it, telling the story of the ordinary experience of fighting in the First World War.
I'd say one of the highlights for me was seeing like the trenches. We saw one on the first day, and then on the last day we went inside one, and it was just really interactive and interesting to see actually what people had to live through in the years of the war, and seeing just how small and narrow and stuff the trenches were. So yeah, that was really good.
Then we also crossed the road to where there was a smallish cemetery, so a Commonwealth War Graves Commission cemetery, which explained, actually when we were there, Mr. Gisby did a brilliant job of kind of telling the students about what the Commonwealth War Graves Commission is, how it works, why it's such an important organisation, and some of the things to look for with every grave, every cemetery that you would go to. For example, how some of them will just say known unto God on the grave because it's an unknown soldier. Some will have the regiment because a badge was found, but it won't have a name, and some will have all of the information, so the soldier's number, the regiment, and their name as well. So on the Saturday, the second day, we started off staying in Belgium, and we went first of all to a British cemetery at Tyncott, which has an old student from Seaford College who is remembered on the wall there. So we spent a little bit of time talking about the student and what we knew about him, and also about the other names, the thousands of other names that are on the wall. And I think that was quite an important point for students to think about, how the First World War is a war that changed Britain and changed it in terms of how everybody in the land was affected in some way or other. And that this student, where we put the wreath down, in many ways very lucky, because by being at a school like Seaford, which has a long history and has always commemorated the name of those students, most of the names of those people were from young men who would have died having left school at the age of 12. No school remembers them. Their name isn't on any wall, isn't read out every November. And actually, it's important to remember the experience of everybody who fought in the First World War. So Tyncott is a really special place.
So another thing that was really good about the trip was remembering the old Seafordians that took part in the First World War and unfortunately fell. One of them being CSG Stevens, who we laid a wreath for at Tyncott, and the second being A.W. Collins, who we also visited at Titval, and remembering them felt very poignant overall and very good and opened my eyes a lot. As I serve in the CCF, I obviously am very influenced by these soldiers, as they probably did the exact same thing as me, and so it really is making me think that those people went through the same thing as me, and I'm honouring their name. So at the remembrance ceremony, it felt a lot more meaningful and impactful when their names were spoken.
When we went to the remembrance service, I'm in the choir, and it was like makes the songs you're singing more emotional, and like you can picture like what you're singing about a lot more. So when they were reading out the names, like knowing you've been to the graves where those like soldiers were, especially like the ex-Seafordians, I think it was really emotional.
Yeah, I think like because we visited them and put down a wreath, I think it will just help like everyone who went on the history trip connect more with the names that are read out.
Then the second place we went to is Langemark German Cemetery, and the contrast is enormous when you walk into the cemetery compared to a Commonwealth War Grave Cemetery. The Commonwealth War Grave Cemetery, they're all very standard. Every gravestone is the same size, regardless of rank. They all look absolutely identical. You go into the German cemetery at Langemark, it doesn't feel that at all. Everything is dark granite, so very bleak looking, and there are lots of graves where there are many, many, many people in each one. So for the students, that contrast is really important, to look at how different nations, the nations on the side that wins, commemorates their war dead, and how the nations that loses commemorates their war dead. Then after that, we left Belgium, and went to France and went to the Somme region. And we went first of all to Loch Nagar crater, which is a mine crater, enormous, from the early days of the Battle of the Somme. And then after that, we went to Thiepval, which is similar in some ways to Tynecott, an enormous cemetery, but also an enormous memorial, which has the names of those who are unknown. We knew that they fought, but we don't know where they fell. So it's kind of a commemoration of the fallen. And Mr. Wilson was able to tell us about, I'm going to say it was his great uncle, because his name was on the memorial at Thiepval, and that's really powerful for everybody to have some kind of link to these names that can look like an enormous list of Smiths and Thomases and Taylors and all of those names, and to have that special link was really important. And then in the evening we went back to Ypres, back to Belgium, and we paid a very important visit to a Belgian chocolate shop, which the students enjoyed very much. And then after that we went to the Menin Gate ceremony. So the Menin Gate in Ypres is the place where all of the names of the fallen of those from the Ypres region are remembered, just in the same way that in the Somme they're remembered at Thiepval. And every day at 8 p.m. there is a ceremony that takes place, has done since the 1920s, when the traffic stops. And we were there on a Saturday night. There were thousands of people there, lots of school groups, there was choir singing, lots of elderly people who come and remember, and it's a really powerful moment. They play the last post, and it's a really special, poignant moment for all of the students and for all of us, really. So then on the Sunday morning, we went to Sanctuary Wood Museum, which is another place which has reconstructed trenches. They're quite different to the ones that we went to on the Friday, because they're very muddy. They're without the precision and organisation that you see at Hooger Crater. And the students really enjoy just kind of getting a sense of walking around and getting muddy and exploring the network of trenches. It's also got enormous amounts of rusty bits of shrapnel and shell craters and so on. So the students really enjoy going to Sanctuary Wood. And then the last place that we went to was Talbot House in the town of Poperinghe. So Talbot House, for me, it's quite a special place because I've been on every single school trip I've ever been to the battlefields. And it's so different because it's about the life that soldiers had behind the trenches and when they're on their free time. And it was set up by Reverend Tubby Clayton, who wanted to have somewhere where the soldiers went, which wasn't all about alcohol and wasn't all about finding prostitutes on the street, and that they would have a more wholesome experience. So they went to Talbot House, they would play cards, drink tea, have a chat and put on performances. And so one of the things that we do there is you watch a video of them doing a sort of comedy skits, essentially. It also now has a really beautiful garden, which I think would have been a real safe haven for lots of people. So that was a real contrast to what we'd done earlier on. So it was nice to see a slightly different approach of how the war was fought. So the students were amazing on the trip, actually. I was really, really proud of them at all times, and particularly how well they listened, because we're very lucky in the history department that Mr. Gisby has a military history degree, so he can bring a whole level of expertise when talking about the First World War that lots of the students hadn't necessarily heard before. So I think that they found that really, really fascinating, and he was able to answer absolutely every question. So the learning was fantastic.
I was very impressed by quite a few of the teachers' knowledge, as they taught us a lot of things without any workbooks or slides in front of them that shows they really do know their stuff.
Yeah, like Mr. Gisby, he really spoke a lot about all the locations, and he had like a lot of knowledge on where we were and what we were seeing.
Yeah, I agree with that, Mr. Gisby, and also Miss Thomas. She was also really helpful as well.
The course that we do on the First World War is a quarter of the students' GCSE, and that particular exam is one where they're looking at different primary sources and different interpretations. So actually going to the battlefields and seeing all of these primary sources about the First World War, as well as having a sense about how the war was fought, is hugely powerful and very important for how they learn.
So I think it's going to help me with my GCSE exam, because I think especially something I struggle with is like remembering and like thinking about like the locations and like picturing them in your head. And I feel like because we've been to the places that we have to like write about, it's like, you know, it's like actually something to visualise, like where we were and like what we're writing about, and it helps us to remember, definitely.
Yeah, I think it's really going to help because with the help of the teachers like telling us all the facts while we were there, I think it just reinforced all the things we're learning at school. So like seeing the places and like going to the museums and reading all the facts for ourselves, it just really helped. I'd say my highlight was probably the going down in the mines. Was like really interesting to see all that because it's like exactly where they walked, and I think being down there just felt really, really amazing. So
far, it has helped me with some of the stuff that we have done about the First World War, and I'm sure that in the future of my GCSEs it'll help me even more in studying, as I'll remember that trip for the rest of my time here at Seaford, and probably for the rest of my life.